So good morning, everyone. I can see colleagues joining the meeting, but just in the interest of time, we would like to start at 11. And on behalf of the SDPI team, I would like to welcome you all to this online meeting on digital trade barriers, the role of data protection and cybersecurity. As some of you would know, this dialogue series is part of SDPI's Strengthening the Use of Evidence for Development Impact SEDI program, in which we are collaborating with the Ministry of Commerce, Federal Board of Revenue, and SAMIDA. The objective of today's meeting, of course, is to look at three specific areas of digital trade. First, of course, in the wake of COVID-19, we understand that the demand for digital trade has immensely increased. So we would like to see what opportunities our panelists see for Pakistan in the digital trade sector. Second, what are the data protection and cybersecurity issues that could be encountered as digital trade volumes increase? We do have some responses from the enterprise sector, which we will be sharing as well. And lastly, how are the relevant regulatory bodies planning to overcome some of these issues and challenges? And we are grateful to some of the regulatory body representatives who have joined us for today's meeting. Our panelists have been provided some relevant questions relevant to their current roles, but of course we'll be revolving around the broader theme for today's meeting. The proceedings of today's meeting are expected to be inputs for the PRMI strategy at the Board of Investment. This is Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative, PRMI strategy. And these proceedings from today's meeting are also expected to be inputs for the deliberations by provincial e-commerce councils, which have been formed last month, and I understand that some of you are part of these e-commerce councils as well. So just in the interest of time, let me very quickly and very briefly introduce our panelists. I understand that I won't be doing justice with the experience and profile which these panelists bring here. We'll be joined by Dr. Abid Suleri, who's the Executive Director of Sustainable Development Policy Institute, also member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. We have from the private sector, Mr. Fawad Niazi Saab, who's the Senior Manager Regulatory Strategy and Compliance at UFON. Mr. Munib Sikandar is a strategic planning expert and of course having a lot of experience and exposure in this area which we are discussing today, continues to help SAMIDA and several other SME promotion organizations across the country. We'll also have Ms. Samar Hassan, who's the co-founder and CEO of Epiphany. From the public sector, we have Mr. Muhammad Bilal Abbasi Saab, who's the Director IT at Ministry of Information Technology and Telecommunication. We are also joined by Mr. Mahmood Al-Hassan, who's the Deputy Director, Cybercrime Wing at Federal Investigation Agency, FIA. And my colleague Maz Javed from SDPI will also be presenting some of the highlights from the survey which SDPI has recently conducted on this subject. Before I move on to the panelists, some very brief housekeeping announcements. We have requested our panelists for around 7 to 8 minutes of their initial response on the questions which were provided to them, after which we will come back to any questions or comments that may be posted by other participants who are joining us today. All participants are welcome to post their questions or comments in the chat box on the right-hand side. You may find me prompting in the interest of timekeeping only. We're also recording this meeting with your permission so that it can be made available to the wider audience, or if you would like to share across your networks. We welcome you to revisit the discussion later, and feel free to share it with your networks. With this, if I can first request Ahmed, do we have Dr. Suley who has joined us to start with? Otherwise, we can. Sorry?
We can start.
Okay, so until the time we are joined by Dr. Suley, we can move to interventions by Mr. Fawad Niazi Saab, who's Senior Manager Regulatory Strategy and Compliance at UFON. Over to Fawad Saab, please.
Thank you, sir. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I guess मेरी आवाज आप लोगों को आ रही है?
जी, please.
Okay, thank you. In fact, I will present shortly about some of the global trends and what are the digital trade barriers perspective that can be evaluated from perspective of Pakistan. So if you see the post-COVID situation or the current situation after the COVID, globally there is a 30% increase in internet traffic. Moreover, the trend is more or less same even after a reasonable time. So we may say that the people are considerably spending more time using connected devices than it was earlier than the COVID situation. And globally, the economy is also going digital, and information, goods and services basically traverse political boundaries more frequently and easily than ever. And also we are witnessing a phenomena of convergence. So globally, digital things are being converged, and all other aspects related to those digital services are basically not moving fastly or converging at the same speed. And also when you see about the importance of social media in our digital services as well as all type of digital communication, almost more than half of the world's population is using social media. And when you basically talk about the data is very critical nowadays in the business. So does the data protection and cybersecurity issues, which is basically now also a focus area in Pakistan. And sooner or later, we will be witnessing 2 more regulatory bodies emerging as a regulator in Pakistan. So if you see the lessons from the COVID, you can say that the countries as well as the companies that move early and decisively in this matter is basically doing the best in this situation. So I will now, want to highlight 3 different perspectives from which we can see the digital trade barriers. For example, if you consider Pakistan as a market for the international players, then Pakistan is a potential market for global players. And if they see Pakistan with respect to digital trade barriers, like for example, US, they says that the Pakistan market dynamics may be a trade barrier for them when it comes to the data protection and cyber security related provisions in the upcoming laws. They basically launch for open and free internet so that digital communication and digital services can proliferate in Pakistan as well. And when you see Pakistan in the capacity of a potential supplier or export of services, of a digital services, then data to the global player is also one of our key input, which they basically needs for their business. So the BPO industry, the content developers which are working in Pakistan, they are eyeing for more business from abroad. So there's a trade barrier from them, which is basically in the global market. And a third point, which is very important nowadays, is everyone is basically focusing on innovative businesses and use cases. So a lot of incubators have been established. Startups are basically starting the business, but uh, the barriers for them would be different with respect to the same like entities which are basically established like Facebook, Google, and all these companies. And also these companies, SMEs in Pakistan, basically needs the services of the global players, internet companies like Google, for their businesses and early catch up for different market accesses. So when you basically talk about the Pakistani companies working in Pakistan, either in the capacity of a SME or a telecom operator, uh, I also attend another seminar in SDPI, which talks about basically SIP structural regulatory analysis. So we basically identify that the regulatory burden and the compliance requirements are basically in three different streams. One is systemic, which basically talk about the provincial and federal level legislations and their compliance requirements. And then the institutions, which basically talk about different regulators. Already in Pakistan, almost 60 different regulators are working, and a company has to respond to multiple operators with respect to different services. And then comes to the procedural things, and all these procedural things are in the manual. So anything manual would be considered as a trade barrier. So my second part of the presentation is about the opportunities for the Pakistan. So it's a very common word that challenges are the opportunities. So basically, we can say that the COVID was a challenge, and it basically drives the demand for the digital and also calls for action to go digital. And basically, private sector is geared up for this purpose. And only thing is they need guidance as well as some traditional regulations analysis. For example, uh, the traditional regulations are basically driving the demand for the regulatory modernization. GSMA has basically working on regulatory modernization in mobile sector because it represents mobile sector of Pakistan as well as globally. And there are many redundant laws. Also, when you consider about the international commitments, the classification of services as well as the service providers, even in the WTO level, as well as the local laws, is not clear. So there's a convergence at the level of services. So does that at the level of the service providers. And when you talk about the globalization and the digitalization, regulatory modernization comes, and there comes the requirement of data protection law and the cybersecurity laws. So even these regulations are the part of the regulatory modernization, but we basically say that there should be an issue of coexistence of redundant provisions of the laws as well as the new laws which may have to coexist only due to resistance from different regulatory authorities already working and regulating some part of the data or cyber laws. And also there are overlapping and limitation of jurisdictions with respect to national boundaries like federal, provincial, as well as the international one. Like for example, your laws may have to be implemented for the companies who are basically operating from abroad, and your users are basically accessing those services. They are not here to provide the services as such. And another trade barrier, which is basically particular for the Pakistan, is the digital divide. So not only the regulations, but the digital divide is also widening. And if you see around yourself, even during the COVID, almost the people who were basically from the middle class, even from the middle class people, their children could not go to school because the government school and some other schools cannot provide the online services for the education. Only the unlimited people got the education, and it's going to prevail further. So the digital divide is basically a combination of different things like digital literacy, cost of terminal equipment, smartphones availability, and also delay in the spectrum auctions and indecisiveness at the end of the policy and regulatory bodies. So my message is basically to, first categorize yourself with your objectives. So this is my humble submission to the people, that we should decide actively, decisively, and clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Fawad Saab, and thank you for responding to all the three questions which we had requested from you. We may, of course, come back to you during the discussion, during the later part of the discussion. May I now request Dr. Abid Suleri, Executive Director, SDPI, for his inputs, please.
Thank you very much, Vakar. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear panelists. It is, of course, a pleasure to have you here at SDPI's webinar and to learn from you on a very important topic, which perhaps in the days of WTO, we used to call them as non-tariff trade barriers. And now the non-tariff trade barriers, they have got transformed into digitalized form. And today we are discussing those digital trade barriers, the NTBs. When we talk of role of data protection, when we talk of cybersecurity as a policy advocate that provides my input at different policy forums, one of the major concerns that come in mind when we talk of data protection and cybersecurity is that if our data is misused and all the efforts and attempts that we are taking to come out from gray list of the FATF and go to white list. Now, if something happens in my bank account and all of a sudden I find that there was a transaction which was made without my knowledge, I may be accused of money laundering, I may be accused of terrorism financing, and this is what scares in the broader digital trade context. And I'm sure that the cybersecurity measures that the government is taking, and I can see that we have a representative from FIA and cybersecurity as well. Perhaps they can guide us better. The second thing that one is quite keen to know is about the whole concept of digital inclusion, especially in the areas where the broadband is not provided because of very valid security concerns. And I'm talking of newly merged districts of KP, the former FATA. I'm talking of parts of Balochistan, where either due to security concerns or due to low density of users, we still don't have those broadbands. We're talking of Gwadar being a game changer, but if you start traveling on coastal highway, you will find out that on coastal Makran coastal highway, apart from one network, you will not be able to connect to any of other networks. And many of those who haven't been to that region before, they will not find out unless and until they are traveling on Makran coastal highway, and then they find their phones non-functional for 5 to 6 to 7 hours. So all of these things, they are to me digital trade barrier. And along with it, another issue about which I am quite interested to listen and quite interested to learn from the experts is the data privacy. All the data of our telco users that is provided in bulk to the advertising companies. So if I open my text message inbox, out of 20 messages, 15 would be for advertisement from real estate, from boutiques, from garments, so I don't know, everywhere. And I often wonder that why don't we have those laws which can protect my data privacy? I even receive calls, not anonymous messages, but even calls where they know my name and they say, okay, Mr. Abbasi, are you interested in buying this piece of land? Are you interested in buying A or B insurance service, etc.? So not only the protection, but also the privacy that is important. And of course, after COVID, I'm not using the word post-COVID, COVID is here to stay, but after COVID, one of the opportunities that we can see in Pakistan is a quick transformation to a digital era. Online health, online education, online banking, online delivery services. So it is a big, gigantic leap towards our early journey towards fourth industrial revolution. But that journey would only be successful if we can identify digital trade barriers, if we can identify role of data protection, if we can identify role of data privacy, cybersecurity. Of course, one would not like to create more hurdles in the name of privacy and protection. So while facilitating the business environment, also respecting the privacy of an individual, maintaining this balance, I think this is what we are trying to learn and we're trying to know from the experts who are here. Thank you very much, Vakar, for bringing me in out of time.
Thank you, Dr. Suleri, for these very important interventions. And I think your point about low internet penetration and lack of internet infrastructure, even in some of the areas, settled areas, and due to which, of course, the access of MSMEs to digital trade may be compromised. I think that's a very important point. I would now like to invite in this discussion Ms. Samar Hassan. We understand that she's worked increasingly quite a lot with the women entrepreneurs in this area. Particularly, we had approached her for inputs around what issues and barriers are being faced by the women entrepreneurs in the gaming industry, on which her enterprise has also been working to help. So thank you very much, Samar, for joining us. It's over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vakar, Dr. Abid. Thank you so much for having me. Am I audible? Am I audible? Yeah? Okay. Yes. All right. So, assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Samar, and like Dr. Vakar said, I've been, I founded Epiphany nearly 4 years back. It's been active for more than 3.5 years now, and we've been working very, very, very closely in the impact entrepreneurship space, including women entrepreneurship. And the work has ranged from micro entrepreneurship all the way to the incubators, accelerators, more of the tech entrepreneurship. Personally, Epiphany has its own acceleration programs, so we work with early stage and growth stage entrepreneurs as well. And over the last 7 months or so, I would say, we've been developing our gaming vertical. So I kind of want to touch upon all of these. Why I'm giving the context is because we did talk a little bit about startups and about doing ease of business. And I think when the policymakers are here, I do want to touch upon that as well, very shortly. So what are the good things? Let's start with the good things, right? So we know that Pakistan has come up in terms of freelancing countries around the world. Part of it has been because of concerted, really very strong focused interventions by the government. So Punjab IT Board, Ministry of IT and Telecom, with digiskills.pk, e-Rozgar program, there was a similar program in KP as well. And we've been able to pull up young Pakistanis who were the masses, so digiskills.pk, I was personally involved, so I can tell you it was a program for the masses to convert people into entrepreneurs, freelancers, and then also, how they can set up their own e-commerce businesses, etc. Now, that is all good. But one of the things which we're always forgetting is the fact that Pakistanis, by and large, even when it comes to international trade, and now the opportunities are humongous, but when it comes to work ethics, when it comes to punctuality, when it comes to open communication and delivering on time, we're lagging behind. And this is an area where definitely more training, more development, more focused attention needs to go in to make sure that we are able to compete with the rest of the world when it comes to international projects and bringing home foreign remittances. The other big problem that I see in front of us when we talk about digital trade and really capitalizing upon the opportunity is when it comes to payments. So like Dr. Saab already highlighted, where is our online payments infrastructure? We still don't have PayPal in the country. it is a big, huge barrier. And it's not only for simple payments that need to come in for freelancers and for international people trying to transact internationally, and people who are trying to export tech services. It also comes in when we're trying to bring in investment into the country, which of course is one of the biggest things that as Pakistanis we are interested in, especially now that there's so many, there is a lot of Pakistani diaspora sitting outside of Pakistan that wants to contribute, and they've been donating money towards philanthropy. But now the time has come to convert a lot of this philanthropy money into actual investments and supporting young entrepreneurs, because Pakistan, obviously, by and large, the government won't be able to create enough jobs for everyone. People have to now, really, get into entrepreneurship. So there have been efforts on the other side to create all of these entrepreneurs. But when it comes towards investments, the people with money sitting outside of Pakistan, there is a big, huge barrier. So these are some policy level interventions when it comes to payments, when it comes to transactions, receiving payments, making payments. I was speaking to a colleague of mine yesterday in the gaming industry. She had to pay somebody in Poland. And first, it took them at least 5 days just to figure out what is the best way to send the money. Personal example, one of the investors wanted to invest in a startup under Epiphany Angels. He could transfer money directly into the founder's account, but not into the company account, right? And obviously that's not okay. The founder doesn't want to get the money. He wants that to be logged on he wants to have that logged into the history of the company. Now, let me talk about a big, huge opportunity, which again, I feel that Pakistan is on the gaming side, which I think is humongous. It is enormous. If we were to tap into that industry properly, I think we, in a few years' time, we wouldn't even be hearing of all of this, debt, and our foreign currency reserves would improve, etc. And that is the gaming industry. So the gaming industry is projected to cross $195 billion. It is larger than it's on the path to becoming larger than your music industry, your film industry combined together. Unpublished statistics from IGDA, which is the International Gaming Developers Association, the Pakistan chapter, unpublished sources indicate that our share of this entire $195 billion economy is just $25 million. Right? So obviously there is a big, huge gap. Now, when we talk about this gap, gaming offers a huge opportunity for us also to employ our young people. So the gaming industry, it's not only for coders, right? So you can come in if you're a graphic design artist. You don't have to be a computer scientist to do it. You can come in if you're a writer, because all stories need to have characters and character building and story building, etc. You can come in if you are, so one of the colleagues that we've got, actually, she studied geography. She is a PhD candidate in geography, right? And she is heading the Global Game Jam. So the idea is that there is a huge opportunity for diverse people to come into gaming. When we're talking about freelancing, we're providing all of these services already. It is a matter of putting in a lot more effort on the training and development side of things. Now, another piece that I do want to talk about is esports. So within the gaming industry, again, esports presents a huge opportunity. So without any support from the government, one of our esports earnings, we rank number 11, right? So a young Pakistani boy, I think he's the youngest person to have earned more than $1 million through competitive esports. His total earnings is $3.6 million. Right, and over there as well, we've got these examples. This kid is called Samel, a young person, not a kid anymore. So young person is called Samel. Similarly, we have examples of Arsalan Ash, who comes from a very underprivileged background, and how he's been able to compete internationally and bring attention to Pakistan. So there is attention on Pakistan. We have seen in the past people from Pakistan contributing to international AAA games. International movies, so when we talk about gaming, it's not just limited to gaming. There is a huge there's a huge, there's huge opportunity for other fields, such as media and entertainment industry, such as architecture. So all of these things, I think, are falling off the wayside because we're not paying enough attention towards a huge opportunity that has arisen. Yesterday, I was again speaking to another advisor of ours who works for Dell in the US. So he pointed out and we were talking about this area and how can Pakistan improve. I was discussing with him, what are the points that from an international perspective he may want us to highlight. So he talked about how in the world right now, because of the tension between US and China, there is this big, huge opportunity which is opening up where Pakistan could technically enter. As part of Dell, they're trying to purchase hardware from different parts of the world right now, not from China anymore, right? And he struggled. He has not been able to find the right partners in Pakistan to outsource that whole project. So again, on the hardware side, why aren't we producing motherboards and all these other equipment for IT that we could easily do? And right now there is that opportunity. So if we started today, perhaps in the next 3 years to 5 years time, we would actually be able to bring over these contracts to Pakistan. Now, another, a few areas that I actually want to highlight about inclusion. So inclusion mein Dr. Abid Saab ne mentioned bhi kar diya already about internet. So this is a big, huge divide which is growing to increase now, right? We've already seen it. Now, this team, a Pakistani team has developed on their own. But now it comes to a matter of internet. So the schools in Peshawar, some of the schools in the other parts of KP, they're going to be able to access it. But now when we talk about newly merged districts where internet coverage does not exist. So I think as a policy level, intervention, one of the first things that we want to do, that we need to do as a country, we need to have internet access for everyone, right? So access to internet for all, I think that has to be, one of the mantras for the government. It just needs to happen. Now, when it comes towards inclusion, in KP, again, I can tell you that a lot of women, and it's not just in KP. So I visited Multan for DigiSkills training. In Multan, the Women's University, which is Women University of Multan, which is a big university, has at least a few thousand young Pakistani women. None of them had phones, right? None of them had phones because they're not permitted to have phones, or they just don't have the, maybe they don't have the financial bandwidth to purchase phones. Now, when you head over onto KP side, over there are restrictions. So we worked with teams, we accelerated teams from KP, where even when you're trying to do trade using Facebook and social media, and we have to understand that a big portion of the entrepreneurial economy, the digital economy, is being run by home business owners who are primarily female. So they may be selling, fashion services, they may be selling clothes, they may be selling food. There's a big portion of that economy. Now imagine that some of these women are unable to participate because they don't have access to phones, they don't have permission, there are culture barriers, they don't have internet coverage, they don't have digital literacy. So when we're talking about inclusion, again, I can't repeat myself enough, I can't stress myself enough. There are programs now by Facebook. Okay, Facebook has a program, that's fine, that's great, but Facebook is obviously going to have its own agenda as well, whatever that may be, right? Why aren't we focused even more on bringing inclusive, making technology accessible for everybody? I think a lot more needs to be done, right? There have been efforts, of course, like I mentioned, DigiSkills.pk, wonderful program, eRozgar, wonderful program, but again, a lot more needs to happen. Simply, even when somebody needs to register using their phone or using a desktop, they may not even have email addresses, right? So we have to go back in time, literally, and teach some of these basic skills before a lot of young Pakistanis, a lot of people who can be part of the productive workforce can actually participate. So these are a few points. The third point, which I did want to mention about policy, so I did speak to someone else again, in terms of the classification for computer games, right? So she was trying to get her company trademarked. So for copyright, there are 4 different classes that she told me for IT services related to video games, right? What her company does is they produce all of the artwork for different computer games and they sell their services internationally. Right now, as of now, class 09, 28, 41, and 42, all 4 of the classes which exist, none of them, pertain to her business. So I think we need to sit with the game industry people. We're happy to coordinate. We're happy to bring together, the people who are working even more intensely in this industry. So perhaps some of these policies can actually evolve. And because we've got somebody from PTA, can I please be very candid and say, please don't ban PUBG. So at the height of some of our webinars that we were doing, where we're bringing international people, we're trying to, project Pakistani, showcase Pakistani talent, PUBG was banned. So I think before banning something just like that, I think you need to sit, have a trusted group of people who you can talk to, discuss what's the best way before banning stuff. Banning things just, perhaps without understanding them or thinking, or, maybe thinking that there are, it is dangerous. I think you need to talk more to the private sector people where they can guide and they can advise. So that's something, you know, that I just wanted to put out there. I know that may sound very candid and whatever, but I think it's important to be said. On the other side, when we talk about esports team, again, so far I have not come across a women esports team. And by and large, what they were telling me, what I've understood internationally as well as locally, when women are competing in Fortnite, for instance, or in PUBG, for instance, they're kicked out, right? Because a lot of people think gaming and women don't go together. Whereas internationally, as well as in Pakistan, we know a lot of women gamers who are actually good enough to compete internationally. So all these millions of dollars in competitive sports, let them come to women, right? Because at the end of the day, when money, this is again, I'm now going to quote research from Women's World Banking. Whenever you financially empower a woman, she ends up spending on education, she ends up spending on health, she ends up spending on increasing the base living standard of her family. And at the end of the day, with education, with better health, with better nutrition, with better living standards, that's when the country is going to progress. Okay, I'm going to stay quiet because I see Dr. Waqar is unmuted. Thank you, Dr. Waqar.
Thank you so much. I think that's a lot of that's very comprehensive, first of all, and I think yes, with the effort of industry players, I do see that sanity prevailed around the TikTok issue as well, and we do see that how I think the government actually sat down in this case with the industry players and tried to find out a solution. I do see that the supplier is also cooperating in this regard. But I think your points around inclusion are very well taken and very well noted, something which will go very strongly from our side as a policy recommendation to the provincial e-commerce councils, as I said in the beginning. I am also seeing some questions in the chat box, and I'll request our panelists to also answer if they feel it necessary, please. With this, let me move to Mr. Munib Sikandar and invite him for his interventions, please. Over to you, Munib.
Thank you, Waqar. I think, so compared to maybe some of the other panelists, I have the opinion of what is a social scientific background. And I think there's a very big misconception, and correct me if I'm wrong later on as the chat box and the question and answer session begins. Digitization didn't just come out of nowhere, right? It's not just COVID happened and then digitization happened. No, digitization has been around for years. It's just that when the COVID breakdown kind of happened, we would, to compare it kind of philosophically, we all kind of entered what Heidegger describes as a state of anxiety, of angst. We didn't know what to do. All our existing ways of being in the world were suddenly shattered. And then suddenly this thing that was always over there on the side, digitization, came to the forefront. So I think first and foremost, I would like to classify the problem of digitization, not as one of technology per se, but as how we as a society and as human beings think about that technology. Here I would kind of quote Ludwig Wittgenstein, who says, "I'm not interested in constructing a building so much as in having a larger perspective view of the foundation of possible buildings." So to start with that initial statement, I'm going to kind of, there's a lot of ground to cover. So what I'll do is I'll take the format of the three particular questions that you've asked me. One of the first ones is, in the wake of COVID-19, what are the kind of opportunities that have emerged for Pakistan within the digital trade sector? Look, the opportunities are absolutely immense. It's not just the e-commerce perspective, but they're kind of, the opportunities that have arisen are on three different levels. First and foremost, we now have the ability to use digitization tools to kind of build these in with new cross-border trade facilitation agreements that we agree with other countries. Here, there's a very innovative approach by a World Economic Agenda contributor, Craig Atkinson, who suggests that he suggests a particular view that is called the Trade Policy 3.0, So he says, a distinctive character of Trade Policy 3.0 is, in addition to writing down the rules of trade in natural language, which is naturally what you kind of did on paper, and then kind of the stage where Pakistan is at right now is transforming towards the use of a national single window. We can also kind of, countries can use that basic two layers that we've kind of built upon and publish computational rules to the internet in a standard way. So access to these digitally executable versions of rules can help businesses. They can create a universal mechanism for determining and automating payments, whether that's domestic or cross-border contacts. And like, however, the name would suggest, the Internet of Rules approach, which is pioneered by many individuals, first and foremost who I've kind of interacted with the most is Joseph Potwin. Via backend systems connected to the internet, a cellular network can support rules to be queried, fetched, and delivered via SMS in support of a paper-based compliance. So the kind of initial topic that we kind of touched upon, that there's a divide between rural and urban areas. Certain people don't have access to information. Well, this kind of approach, of course, I think it's too long to go through within 10 to 12 minutes, but this is definitely an approach that we should be considering, which I'd be very happy to elaborate on as we move forward. The second way that an opportunity that this is presented is how the government works. So what we now have the ability to do is a very innovative idea that Burhan Rasool at the Punjab Institute of Technology Board suggested, is we automate the supply and demand patterns of how agricultural commodities are grown, and the entire supply chain kind of gets automated with real-time AI and blockchain technologies. I'm not going to go into the technology. I would be kidding myself if I actually would say that I understand it. But what this kind of does is it brings us back to the point that Hayek says, that the more the government plans, the less it is possible for actual people to plan with, and people here, I'm kind of referring to the private sector. So the more you kind of automate your supply and demand patterns, the less there is a need of a patwari or a government intervening, going to shops, saying, oh, you need to set a minimum price. This is the second way that kind of digitization, it allows us to digitize the entire supply chain. It's almost kind of looking at the Walmart system. They have a just-in-time system. When a particular supply of a particular good is about to run low, the computers send a signal, automated message to the supplier, the vendor, who now knows that this particular Walmart in, say, Arizona needs, let's say, 200 gallons of water. They immediately can meet the supply and demand gap in a very efficient way, far more efficient than our current paper-based system. Finally, and I think the most relevant point within our context is, how has the digitization and the trend towards digitization allowed the SMEs, the organizations to conduct digital trade? Look, we all know e-commerce is a big business. I think more than 1.5 million people are on this. It is estimated that $25 trillion around the world are spent. But a huge problem about e-commerce platforms is that they tend to be dominated by big players such as Amazon, Flipkart. And unfortunately for developing countries, it's very difficult to get into these platforms because there are a lot of different problems. One solution that we can kind of, so I think my fellow panelists have already highlighted some of the issues. I'd like to kind of focus on some of the solutions that we can do. One alternative we can do is our firms can set up their own firms and establish them as a legal entity in a foreign nation. So let's hypothetically say that we have an exporter over here. If he registers himself within the United States as a legal entity, he can kind of benefit on a number of different areas. He has direct market access. He has more branding control and exposure. He has to deal with less import process controls. There are lower transaction costs. He has more control over the distribution channels. There's market side value addition from being in that country. There's access to the local suppliers and vendors and branding agencies and and distributors that normally he would not have access to otherwise. Now, why this is what has basically the move forward that digitization has done is, prior to this, only large multinational companies could establish themselves within different countries. As a result of digitization, information asymmetry has been reduced. So you can now get an international lawyer, you can get all of these legal formalities taken care for you at a fraction of the cost. So that's one big opportunity that kind of has been presented. Another option is that if you're a small firm and you can't kind of register yourself, you don't have the resources, well, why don't you collaborate? So let's say we're 15 to 20 different salt exporters. We form a collective. We say we're the Union of Pakistani Salt Exporters, and we register ourselves as that one single entity in that country. What that does is it reduces costs. We can enjoy economies of scale. But what is hindering that? Now, digitization is not the problem over here. The problem is social economics. The problem is how we organize ourselves. The problem is, and what is kind of stopping 15 to 20 different small companies to form a collaborative and form a single entity in, say, the US or the EU? Well, a few simple questions, right? Do we trust each other? What is the legal group that we will be taking? Who will lead the group? Who will keep social cohesion? And am I ready to kind of commit to spending an initial long-term fixed cost, the returns of which will only be visible a couple of years later? Now here the problem is a classic, what John Nash says, is it's a prisoner's dilemma. If we as individuals can kind of come together, if we can put aside our differences, if we can kind of collectively collaborate, we can have a higher payoff. But because there's propensity to cheat, unfortunately, it's not digitization that's stopping us from taking the benefits. It's our own limitations of trusting each other. So that trust, that social cohesion needs to be built in.
Sure. So Muneeb, I think these are some very interesting interventions, and maybe we'll have to come back to you again because I think your points around how, for example, the applications in agriculture and land market need to be informed more clearly. I think those are important. If you allow me, maybe we'll be coming back to you again in just a while, if that's okay.
Sure, that's perfectly fine.
So let me now move to Mr. Muhammad Bilal Abbasi Saab from the Ministry of Information Technology and Telecommunication for his perspective. We do understand that Samar touched upon some of the initiatives by the Ministry of IT, but I think it will be important to have a more elaborate view from Abbasi Saab, as well as if he would like to respond to any of the suggestions provided by today's panelists as well. It's over to you, Bilal Abbasi Saab.
Thank you very much, Bukar. Hello, everyone. I have received the questions, and again, I've been listening to the two different panelists. I'll respond to all the details provided by them, but there are a few things related to the trade I touch base upon. You know, after COVID, international trade dynamics are changing. A lot of opportunities are created, and many countries have been losing business. If we take example of Philippines, India, even China, they have been losing business, especially in IT sector. That one important thing is that we need to see our trade dynamics first. Most of our trade is with US. It's around 52%. Most of our services, ITS services, are with US, and then there is a huge gap. And at 12%, we are trading with European countries. So we need to see this thing, that we need to have a good balance. And after COVID, there's a huge opportunity because, as I mentioned, that some of the countries are losing business. So, so we can be the face of few of the countries. For example, we have been in discussion with China that they have been losing business due to two things. One is COVID, and second is their trade war with US. So instead that they start selling their products directly to different markets, as we have seen in past, they can use Pakistan as their face, and we can collaborate on different chapters and provide the services to Middle East, Africa, Europe, and America. Ministry of IT has done quite a lot of things towards establishing our local partners, and we have been trying our best to facilitate the private sector. So what we have done is that we have noticed that most of our local companies, they're not kind of bringing the money back to Pakistan, and due to that reason, the overall look of the Pakistani market seems to be very small. So what we have done is we are currently in process of introducing 5% cash reward scheme for IT, ITS, PPO sector on the net export remittances, including call centers. This will result in attracting businesses to bring remittances to Pakistan. We are also working in establishment of BPO workspaces through establishment of IT parks and special technology zones. The basic purpose of this is to provide an infrastructure to international companies. If they try to invest in Pakistan, there needs to be certain things available in our kitty. For example, they need to have infrastructure. They need to have a good human resource. So Ministry of IT is working in establishing both of them. We are working towards the infrastructure side. We are working towards the regulatory side, and we are also working on building a good HR. I'll come to every point individually. Second important thing is that we are also interacting with State Bank of Pakistan to provide some support to our local companies by fast tracking foreign currency remittances process, by providing bank loans against the intellectual property rights. We are also working on, marketing and industry intelligence and digital branding and PR for promoting the image of Pakistan IT industry in key markets abroad. We have interacted with all the revenue boards for low and uniform taxation, because what we feel that overall taxation in Pakistan is so diverse that the companies often get confused at what kind of taxes they need to pay, and they end up paying a lot of taxes, and overall business case for them becomes not feasible. We have also worked with State Bank over internationally. We have e-payment and merchant accounts to enable businesses to open merchant accounts in their respective branch banks, because we have been receiving these complaints. We have also requested SDPI, and it's happening now, that opening of a bank account for freelancers. So these are a few things which we have already worked on. Another important thing is the industry has been, we need to work on certain things. When there is a demand from the international markets, we need to see that how capable are we to provide those services. And when we say how capable we are, that means we need to see our HR. So we are producing around 25,000 plus graduates every year, IT graduates. But the quality of those graduates has not been up to the mark. So what we did, we have introduced a program that is called as a bootcamp program, where we are going to train them on modern and emerging technologies, which are cloud computing, blockchain, and artificial intelligence. We are going to make around 300 trainers in Pakistan, and they are further going to train different universities and students across Pakistan. We are also working on IoTs. We are also working on the AI project, where we are going to establish research centers. Now, these are the things which are primarily focused towards the HR, because a good HR is going to result in good business. Towards the infrastructure side, we're already building a technology park in Islamabad. We have also proposed a project. It's around a 10 billion project with the name Special Technology Zone, where we are going to establish land for the companies, and through public-private partnership, we are going to attract real estate businesses to actually develop those different towers for the telecom companies and IT companies on the rates specified by the government. This infrastructure is going to attract a lot of business. And then towards the regulation side, that is the last thing which I wanted to discuss on and discuss in detail as well. There are three policies which we are working on right now. The first one is information security policy. Again, when we talk about the digital trade, information security is going to play its role, and that's important that digital trade and security goes hand in hand. The second important thing is personal data protection law. And the third one is cloud policy. Now, what we are doing is towards a personal data protection, we have drafted a bill. We put that bill on our website. We actually requested every individual, if they want to comment on it, they can go online and they can send us their feedback. We have received around 100 odd comments. In fact, organization has commented on it. And Ministry of IT wanted, an inclusive approach. That's why we engaged each one of them, and we wanted to hear out that what was exactly the rationale behind their views and comments. Our process is complete, and the important part is the needs of our local business are different than the needs of our international companies. So we need to strike a balance here. Some of the companies, and I'm talking about the telecom companies here, their need is that probably we should come up with a plan, with a bill which promotes their businesses and local businesses. But at the same time, when we do that, it is going to hurt international business, because international trade and international businesses says this thing that there should be an open data sharing, and we should allow cross-border data. Our bill is mostly inspired by GDPR. We have incorporated most of the clauses from GDPR. And that is the most active bill around the globe right now. We kind of incorporated our local context as well, and it is important because when you talk about businesses, if somebody's coming in our country doing business and kind of providing services to our local market, but taking back all the money without any taxation, without getting registered in Pakistan, without actually contributing towards the job creation, we need to kind of think about it. So that's why our bill not only contains that how to protect the data of a citizen, but also how to protect the businesses of Pakistan as well. Towards the information security side, we have drafted our policy. The major objective of that policy is the protection of digital rights of citizens. We're also working on a framework for protection of resources. Information-related accountabilities and responsibilities need to be identified. Information security strategy is incorporated in ownership of data, standardization, compliance, and quality assurance. We have also worked towards awareness and skills, because we see that it's very important to actually have an awareness campaigns regarding information security. Data sovereignty and self-reliance, also an important chapter which we have covered. It's one of our objectives. Implementation of information security, risk management, enforcement, cooperation between public and private sector. These are the few elements which we have kind of covered in our information security policy. That policy has different stakeholders. In fact, the stakeholders from our from the Foreign Office, from commerce, from our security operators is also part of this thing. The last policy which I want to touch is our cloud policy. The cloud policy is majorly, we started working on it like a month ago. And the key elements which we are touching is that what is going to be, how we are going to handle the data sovereignty. And the most important part is what will be the classification. So based on that classification, we have proposed 3 to 4 types of cloud services for the companies. And one is on-premises private cloud. We are also proposing a government cloud. We are also proposing a public cloud where the companies like Amazon, Microsoft, they can come in Pakistan and invest. And we are also going for an accreditation of CSPs, what is going to be the checklist of cloud service providers regarding the provision of the cloud services. So there are a lot of things which we are working in parallel. The team we have is like very new to Ministry of IT, and they are majorly from the private sector, and the good thing is that there is a good mix of good blend of bureaucrats and technocrats. So we are very hopeful that we are going to come up with good policies. The interesting part is that whatever policy we are making, we're making sure that we engage private sector in that policy. So if you look at our personal data protection bill, we have engaged international companies. We have also engaged private companies and the civil society as well. Similarly, for cloud policy, we are interacting with the companies as well. And regarding information security policy, there is a committee that consists of, again, private sector. Again, they are supporting us in developing that cybersecurity/information security policy. So this is from my side, and if there's any question,
thank you, Bilal Sahab. I think this was very well covered. I think it's very encouraging to note that you are inviting response from the private sector on the 3 policies which you have mentioned. I think this is also something which we will amplify from our platform as well, so that issues around inclusion and participation are well addressed in the policy formulation. I'm expecting some comments for your advice in the chat box shortly. But before that, let me now also invite response from our colleague, Mr. Mahmood Al-Hassan Saab, who's representing the cybercrime wing at the Federal Investigation Agency. Mahmood Saab, it's over to you, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Vikar Sahab. Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful conference, for giving me the opportunity to talk about the data protection and cybersecurity issues. As you know, development in the information and the communication technology from the last decade have significant change in our lives and provide new opportunities for consumer and business. An increased number of consumers have increased to the internet and engaged in e-commerce, in which provide easier and faster access to products and services. It also presents some challenges for the consumer that differ from those encountered during offline commercial transactions. Such challenges have been raised to the need to adopt existing laws and regulatory framework to the particular requirement of e-commerce. Some of the most common challenges currently currently faced by the cyberspace of Pakistan are fallen. For example, phishing attacks, in which carefully targeted digital messages are transmitted to fool people into clicking on a link that can install malware or expose sensitive data. Hello, are you hearing me?
Yes, yes, you're audible, please.
The second challenges is the ransomware attacks are believed to cost victims billions of dollars every year, as hackers deploy technologies that enable them to literally kidnap an individual or organization database and hold all the information for ransom. So there are a number of other challenges. For example, if you see the identity thefts, and if you go through the number of other attacks, EOT attacks are also very common in cyber crimes. अगर हम पिछले 3 साल का मैं कंपैरिजन करता हूँ फाइनेंशियल फ्रॉड को साइबर क्राइम में, तो हम देखते हैं कि 2018 में 2000 अराउंड 2000 कंप्लेंट्स वर रिपोर्टेड, and in 2019 around 12,000 complaints were reported related to this financial crime or e-commerce crime. And in the last 10 months, around 13,000 complaints were registered in cyber crime FIA. So if you look into the ratio and overall ratio, around 20% complaints were reported regarding the financial crime. जब तक हम पिछले 3-4 खासकर जो कोविड का जितना भी टाइम गुजरा है उसमें जो चीज़ हमने ऑब्जर्व किया उसमें ये चीज़ देखी कि क्योंकि लोग घर से बैठ के सारी एक्टिविटीज़ परफॉर्म कर रहे थे, तो उसमें बहुत ज़्यादा इश्यूज क्रिएट हुए। जो इतने भी जो फाइनेंशियल से रिलेटेड थे वो बहुत ज़्यादा क्राइम रिपोर्ट होने शुरू हुए। उसकी अगर रीज़न देखें तो जो हमने आइडेंटिफाई की और जो चीज़ें हुई उसमें रीज़न, सबसे बड़ी रीज़न जो चीज़ें थी, क्योंकि हमारे पास जो साइबर से रिलेटेड लॉज हैं, प्रिवेंशन ऑफ इलेक्ट्रॉनिक क्राइम एक्ट है स्पेसिफिकली, जो उसमें जितने भी मतलब 3 सेक्शन को छोड़ के बाकी सब नॉन कॉग्निजेबल हैं। नॉन कॉग्निजेबल मीन्स कि उसमें पुलिस जो है डायरेक्ट या FIA डायरेक्ट हम लोग इंटरवेन नहीं कर सकते। तो उसकी वजह से क्रिमिनल्स को ये चीज़ का आइडिया था, तो उस चीज़ को वो एक्सप्लॉइट कर रहे हैं। तो अभी हमने रिसेंटली मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ IT के साथ भी और मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ इंटीरियर के साथ भी और सेनेट और नेशनल असेंबली में भी ये रिक्वेस्ट हमने मूव की है कि हमारे जो क्राइम्स है उसका रेशो बहुत ज़्यादा, स्पेशली जो फाइनेंशियल क्राइम है बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ रहा है। और उसकी वजह ये है कि हमारा जो PICA है, प्रिवेंशन ऑफ इलेक्ट्रॉनिक क्राइम एक्ट है, एज़ कम्पेयर टू अदर लॉज जो है ना, मतलब पुलिसिंग के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से अगर देखें तो बहुत वीक लॉ है, क्योंकि जिसमें आप डायरेक्ट अरेस्ट नहीं कर सकते, आप इन्वेस्टिगेशन डायरेक्ट नहीं कर सकते, FIA उस कॉग्निजेंस नहीं ले सकता, तो फिर बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है। क्योंकि हमारे जितने भी फाइनेंशियल से रिलेटेड जितने भी रिपोर्टेड केसेस ये होते हैं, जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल बहुत ज़्यादा हमें आजकल ऑनलाइन बैंकिंग में बहुत ज़्यादा इश्यूज आ रहे हैं, बहुत ज़्यादा लोगों के बड़े इजीली कॉल करके लोग उसके तमाम क्रेडेंशियल ले लेते हैं और उससे इंफॉर्मेशन लेके उसके तमाम जितना भी डाटा क्या नाम बैंक से तमाम पैसे निकाल लेते हैं। तो इस तरह के जो केसेस रिपोर्ट हो रहे हैं, जो बहुत ज़्यादा रिपोर्ट हो रहे हैं, तो हमारी रिक्वेस्ट मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ IT से और स्पेशली जो सेनेट से और नेशनल असेंबली से ये थी कि इस लॉ को इस तरीके से मतलब ड्राफ्ट किया जाए, इम्प्रूव किया जाए कि ताकि जो है ना कॉग्निजेंस हमें मिल सके ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा। सेकेंडली जो इश्यूज़ हैं जिसके ऊपर हम बहुत ज़्यादा काम भी कर रहे हैं, हमने अवेयरनेस का बहुत बड़ी कैंपेन मतलब चलाई है, जिसमें अपना सोशल मीडिया भी अपने अकाउंट्स हैं हमारे, वो भी हमने यूज़ कर रहे हैं। इसके अलावा जितना स्टेट बैंक के साथ हमारी बहुत क्लोज कोऑर्डिनेशन चल रही है। मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ IT को भी हमने काफ़ी सारी मीटिंग्स हम अटेंड कर चुके हैं। जो क्या नाम है, अब्बासी साहब ने बताया कि जो पॉलिसीज़ और प्रोसीजर्स जो चीज़ें बन रही हैं, तो ओवरऑल अगर देखा जाए, अगर हम इसको सम अप करना चाहें तो देखें तो जो क्राइम का रेशो है वो पिछले 2 साल में बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ गया है। अराउंड जो साइबर से रिलेटेड अगर आप देखते हैं तो 25,000 2018 में हमारे पास रिपोर्ट हुए केस, और इन 10th मंथ में अराउंड 47,000 केसेस रिपोर्ट हुए। तो ये ऑलमोस्ट डबल मतलब इस साल हो गया। तो उसकी रीज़न अगर देखा जाए तो एक तो पब्लिक को अवेयरनेस नहीं है, और दूसरा जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर या जितने भी बैंक्स हैं उसमें अभी इंफॉर्मेशन सिक्योरिटी के उस लेवल के ऊपर काम नहीं हो रहा जिस लेवल पे उसकी रिक्वायरमेंट है। बैंक्स के भी हमने बहुत सारी रिक्वेस्ट की है, बहुत ज़्यादा मीटिंग्स भी हो चुकी हैं जिसमें उन्होंने उनको काफ़ी सारी सजेशन भी दिए हैं कि जो इंफॉर्मेशन सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसीज़ हैं उसको जो है इम्प्लीमेंट किया जाए। तो जब तक ये चीज़ें नहीं होंगी तब तक बहुत मुश्किल है कि हम अपना एक सिक्योर इन्वायरमेंट जो है ना बिजनेसमैन को दे सकें, तब कि वो अपनी ट्रांजैक्शन और अपने बिजनेस को कर सकें। इसके अलावा अगर कोई क्वेश्चन हो तो जरूर।
जी thank you Mahmood Saab, and very happy to note that you have moved this to the parliament, and you will be seeking stronger legal cover so that at least police can be provided the powers to check, police and FIA can be provided the powers to check these cyber crimes. I believe this is long overdue, but very encouraging to know that FIA is pursuing this. Thank you indeed. So before going back to our panelists, I do see that there are some questions in the chat box for some of our panelists. But before going back to them, there's a brief survey which SDPI had conducted as part of this activity, just to highlight what are the firms, what are the private enterprise saying on this subject. And for that, if I can request our colleague Maz to quickly show us those 2 or 3 slides which are presenting the main findings, main challenges, and main recommendations. So Maz, if you can share your screen, please.
First of all, I humbly thank Dr. Vakar and SDPI for this opportunity to be part of distinguished panel. So basically, this survey is conducted in last month of September this year. The survey is part of a national action plan that SDPI is working on in collaboration with UNESCAP to develop on challenges Pakistan is facing in domain of digital trade, and what opportunities can be accessed. So basically there are 3 basic objectives of this survey. The first one is to find out the barriers being faced by the firms involved in digital trade related sectors in terms of financial and fiscal constraints and restrictions. Secondly, there are legislative requirements in terms of data protection, data transfer, and data retention. So we unearthed those restrictions that are being faced by the private firms. So this is basically the main objective that is highly linked with this ongoing webinar, sorry. The last but not the least focus of the survey was to highlight the role of digital technologies in private sector response to COVID-19. So here are the survey respondents. So from the public sector, we went to directly linked public institutions like PTA, PEPRA, CCP, SPP, and many others. Similarly, from the private sector, we go to software houses, law firms that deal in the services of IPR, and telecommunication companies. So I will quickly go to the survey findings. So here I'm going to briefly explain the survey findings in line with the survey objective. One of the survey objective focuses on the first one is the regulatory barriers in terms of fiscal space. So the survey findings tell us that leading barriers in the foreign exchange is the foreign exchange movement that is experienced to be very tedious for the foreign investors. Similarly, the repatriation of profits by the foreign companies and investors is also very difficult, as highlighted in the survey by private sector. Secondly, there are financial constraints for IT or ICT related companies, as most of commercial banks feel uncomfortable while extending the loan facilities and fulfilling their financing needs. So it is being suggested by PSEB to State Bank to develop ICT focused commercial branches in major cities so that financing needs of IT companies can be met. Lastly, the focus has also been on the mechanism in public institutions to respond on survey queries by the foreign investors, as there lies a gap in terms of available legal framework and between the ongoing practices. So this gap needs also be to covered. The second focus of the survey was on the legislative requirements in terms of data protection. So the Constitution of Pakistan itself talks about the fundamental rights to privacy, as it's mentioned in Article 14. Then there is also protection provided in Pakistan law under the Prevention of Electronic Crime Act, PICA. So PICA aims to prevent unauthorized acts that with respect to information system and provides mechanism for investigation, prosecution, trials, and international cooperation. But there is a lack of data protection laws in the country. Although Ministry of IT has worked on data protection and bill is passed, a bill is presented in the assemblies, but it is long awaited to be passed. Similarly, as of now, currently the PICA rules tells us the FIA is the main authority that and has all the rights to deal with such kind of, to take such measures to deal with data protection and cybersecurity. So there is, and lastly, we have seen that there is an overlap in between the institutions and legal boundaries are not very much clear. So there is also an issue of data sharing framework. So data sharing framework is not developed to share the information in between the public institutions. It also creates the data security concerns. So the last focus of the survey is on the role of COVID-19 and its impact and how did firms respond to COVID-19. It is found that impact of digital trade related products and services to address the crisis has been positive and significant, but they are time limited. It takes time for the firms to adopt the new technologies and new ways of operations. So in terms of its impact on the labor market, it's found that due to financial difficulties being faced by the firms involved in digital trade, the impact on the employment has been neutral. It is noticed that the impact is not negative because most of the firms have adopted new ways of operations to operate the business. So it is seen that neither the impact has been positive nor it's seen negative on the employment. So the situation regarding the intellectual property rights is another focus of the survey, and it is seen that IPR in the last year has improved in terms of digital products and services. So I think I will stop here, and I will be happy to respond if there is any query. Thank you.
Thank you, Maz. And I think we have consciously refrained from sort of providing any policy recommendations because we felt that these should come from the private sector. So I will quickly go back in the interest of time. We have lost 10 minutes now, and just in the interest of time, I'll go back to our colleagues representing the private sector. So I want to invite, in case there are any further interventions from Fawad Saab, Samar, Munib, in case any of you three would like to come in. You've heard Bilal Saab and Mahmood Saab speak about government's response as well as the measures which the government is already taking to facilitate or to correct the current sort of challenges, issues faced by the private sector. But I would like to quickly invite interventions from yourselves. Maybe if we could have, let's say, 1 to 2 minutes each from you. So Fawad Sab, over to you.
Thank you, Waqar Sab. Basically, my humble intervention would be a single one. Like the people making policy and regulations should basically have a map with them. They should also map all the regulations and the key obligations on the private sector locally as well as internationally. Then they could have a very good idea that where is the overlap and where there is a requirement of having a modernization in the obligations as well, so that even the languages of the drafts can be compared and identified because eventually when we will be on the other side of the field, complying to these obligations, we will definitely have to map those laws against our operations, and there is a huge compliance cost if we have to take permissions from 3 different authorities about doing a single set of actions or operations. It is very critical for the small businesses as well, because when you regulate the sector with the perspective of the international big clients, the local industry and the local app providers, which may have a potential to increase their footprints, cannot comply to those regulations from the day one. Facebook has gained the momentum after having a lots of years of free ride, and now they can easily comply to any regulations. But if a small entity wants to operate in Pakistan, it's very difficult to start the business. So please map these regulations, map these authorities roles, powers, functions, because it's very important to have a clarity in this scenario. Thank you, sir.
Very important, very important. Thank you. Samar?
I just want to kind of reiterate, right? So internet access for all, I think ये बहुत ही एक basic चीज़ है, we have to do it. जो भी, whether we need to work closely with the telecom providers, whatever we need to do, incentivize it for them, whatever needs to happen, that needs to happen yesterday. So that I think is number one, right? So inclusion, we're going to continue talking about this. हमारी आधी से ज़्यादा आवाम से भी ज़्यादा बल्कि will remain uneducated. We will not be able to progress. So bottom line, we need to do it. Payments, we need to make it as smooth as possible. We need to facilitate people who are trying to earn honest livelihoods, right? We don't want people to be unemployed. ये तो basic बात है, right? So again, let's make it as smooth as possible. Gaming के ऊपर please तवज्जो दें. We're happy to help. We've got really excited young people. अच्छा, gaming industry की एक और बहुत interesting बात है, ज़्यादातर लोग are educated, the ones who are entering into this field, right? Esports side is different. Esports में really underprivileged children are also participating, playing games and trying to earn money and compete internationally, right? तो वहाँ पे वो different है, but जो gaming studios हैं, by and large, they're educated people, they understand, they're willing to help. But they're very busy. So we're happy to connect and do that. But please, let's pay better attention to this area, which is huge potential. Infrastructure we talked about already. We've got young people, young talent. We're not producing enough locally, right? We're not doing enough. UPSs bhi nahi banate, bahut sari cheezein. So anyway, that's going to be my bottom line. Ki look, there are people who are willing to work, international people, Pakistani diaspora, etc. Find the people who are going to actually put their weight behind the interventions. You're the government, people want to help, right? I think that was the best part about this particular sitting government, that for the first time there were so many people who ended up voting and ended up being part of this whole country for the first time in a way, right? So I think utilize the young people. We're there, we're here to help.
Thank you, Samar, really appreciate. Muneeb?
I absolutely agree with the two fellow participants right before me. I think the government needs to include the private sector. In fact, it doesn't need to, it has to. The only way that we can bridge these immense challenges in front of us without the private sector, it's impossible. And I think it's a very bad approach to think that, oh, the private sector just cares about money. No. I'm not going to focus on regulation. The one key point that I do want to hit, if we want to reduce the gap between the infrastructure, I think the fastest and quickest way to do this is open source. Open source is the way forward. Open source is the way that we can kind of cut costs of the software, of the procuring, and then we can kind of keep on building on top of it. I don't have time to go into what open source is and how it can be utilized, but I'm happy to explain to anyone from the government that would be interested. And thirdly, the point about educating the public, the point about getting information out, I offer, anyone in the government, I offer you free help from the London School of Economics Behavioral Decision Science Lab. It's one of the leading behavioral decision science units in the world. Dr. Umar Taj has already worked with the Digital Pakistan when it came to framing the ringtones, So whenever you dial, there's a certain coronavirus warning that you should do this, you should do that. A lot of behavioral decision science, a lot of work went into that. And if that intervention was so successful, why can't this be applied in this context as well? Our information provision, our ideas, when we kind of go out to the general public, need to be as simple as possible. And the only way we can do that is through the effective use of behavioral decision sciences to understand how our people think. You can't just, the government can't just think that if they dictate that this is the regulation, that people will kind of follow through. Some people, sadly, it's not a matter of rebellion. They just don't understand. They're very complicated. And as Fahad pointed out, there's so many different regulations. For one SME player, you know, it's just too much to get his kind of head wrapped around it. And until we can't solve that, we will never kind of be able to break down these digital barriers. That's
Agreed.
it.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for putting this across very strongly. Really appreciate this. Bilal Sab, any final thoughts? I'm consciously bringing you at the end so that if there's anything that this fraternity, this community can help with, we are here, and of course we'll of course be also communicating the proceedings formally, but also available to help in any other space as well. Over to you.
So there are two things. One, I'll agree to the part what Fahad Fawad said, and look, our approach is inclusive, and whenever we make policies, I mean, I specifically will point out to the regime we right now have. We try to see what are the existing policies and what do we have in our plate right now, and what are the gaps. So in case of the policies I have referred to, they are the policies which are the need of the hour. And while formulating them, I can tell you this thing that it's not just the technical team who is actually working on it. It's a legal team as well. And when I say that legal team is also engaged, that means that they tell us the legalities of the policy or the bill, but they also tell us that what are the existing policies which might, you know, conflict with our, and what are the policies which are going to complement our bill. So it's not that, you know, out of the blue, we think of something and we start making policy. We don't want to over-regulate our sector. We don't want to, you know, do something which is going to hurt our businesses. So I personally think that we are kind of thinking on the lines which Fawad has already mentioned. Regarding Munib's talked about the open source. I'm still unable to get his question because we kind of not, if you look at the Digital Pakistan policy, we also kind of promote the open source. And when we talk about the rest of the things, like there are certain solutions which cannot be open source. So it's basically on the need. What exactly is the need? If you're talking about open data, we have covered that part in our personal data protection part. There needs to be certain data which should be available to the community, to the researchers, so that they can go ahead with their innovation. So personally, I think that government alone cannot do anything, and we always welcome the voices from the private sector. And that's why we try our best to have an inclusive approach where we can not only invite the public sector, private sector, academia, and the institutions which are working towards the policy making. So our approach is inclusive. And if you ever feel that, you know, government is like going ahead with certain policies which are not in the best interest of citizens, you can always contact Ministry of IT, myself. We'll be happy to respond. There is one important factor I want to tell all of you. When you make a policy, you cannot make everyone happy because there are so many different facets you have to deal with. Everyone has their own needs. A citizen has different needs. A business has a different needs. Your international companies have different needs, and the government organization have different needs. So we need to strike a balance. And while striking that balance, you know, sometimes you make few people happy, few are angry with you, but this is how policy works. You cannot make everyone happy with your policy. So We try to make maximum people happy. We want to support businesses as well as the citizens of Pakistan. And whatever the policy we are going to formulate, it is going to be in the best interest of Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bilal Sahab. We do understand you're covering a very large space here. Let me end by first of all thanking the colleagues who participated as panelists. I do understand there was certain level of preparation which they had to do on their end. This is a technical subject. People are very passionate about this, and really grateful for this engagement. Very encouraged to see that the attendees have also contributed very proactively in the chat, which I'm now seeing in the Q&A section. On our part, the way forward is that we'll continue to broker this initiative. Of course, this was an activity which actually came out from the previous session on the same subject, and there was a demand to have a more focused session around the data security and cybersecurity issues in the digital trade space. So this is what we have tried to do. Of course, it was demand driven, and we also understand that BOI and Ministry of Commerce would be very interested in today's proceedings as well. So in case our colleagues who are attendees, who are panelists, happen to have any further recommendations before we go back to the BOI and the Commerce Ministry, please feel free to forward this to my colleague Ahmed Khaber. And of course, we will be coming back to you with the proceedings, which will be uploaded on the SDPI's website, including the video recording from this session. So once again, I thank all of you for your time, and very soon we'll be requesting all of you again for a follow-up session as, of course, queries emerge or as demand emerges on this subject. Thank you once again.